I rarely get the chance to talk about this topic. And the fate of a professor in Morocco is very much one of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in some way. You teach things that you might not necessarily like, and you do research things that definitely do not connect to your work. So you have to have these two lives. And so, you know, for obvious reasons, you don't get the chance to talk to students and, you know, future researchers on the things that matter to you. And you conduct this sort of conversation in scholarly way through papers and conferences. So this is a rare opportunity where we can combine l'utile à l'agréable, you know, the things that we like with the things that may be extremely useful. And that's because for research, for professional research, you have to focus on a niche that might not be relevant to everyone's interest. And so we end up talking to a small community of like-minded scholars and interested people. But I think this is a quite relevant topic for a large audience today. And the reason for that is we don't know a lot about the embassy of Mohamed bin Haddū. Now, I recently completed an article which was long overdue, but that's only the first draft. So after finishing it, you know, you take a distance and you feel like, wow, I could have done better. So I let it rest, and I'm hoping to get some feedback from today's workshop, as well as from my friend, a professional historian. I'm not a historian, by the way. I am an amateur, in a sense. I have so much passion for digging into archives, and with my friend Karim, I think we discovered this. But we, you know, converted historians can be even more passionate. So I don't want to talk a lot about this, but as my colleague, Professor Barhoun, whom I would like to thank very much for all his efforts and for spearheading so many activities, I worked on this topic on my PhD a long time ago in the 90s. That is the previous century. I spent several years working on it and finishing a dissertation defended successfully in 2000. So that was, as I keep saying to my supervisee, doctoral dissertation is one thing, you know, professional publishing is quite a different thing. So I finished the dissertation, but I already have venues, like what I could do with it. And I kept working on and off on this, especially the materials that I discovered in the British Library, but also the early prints, the early, you know, 17th century, early 18th century, but also some Victorian books on Tangiers history. And I thought we should provide a source book for future historians, especially in our part of the world. So I edited this book with a very detailed and elaborate introduction. Initially, I had a plan to write a whole book, but then that would have made this a voluminous thing. So I ended up writing a 25,000-word introduction, very elaborate, in which I tried to address a number of issues in British historiography, especially in the late 19th century and more recently. And so it received reviews, very positive reviews in general, some critical ones as well. So that was the first step. And while I was doing that, this guy was missing from the picture. I only could refer to him because he didn't, you know, fit within the scope of the book. This was more about Tangier in general, and he deserved more space. And so I eventually decided to work on him separately. The problem with the history of bin Haddū is that there are no references on bin Haddū. You know, in Moroccan archives, there's practically nothing. He's like someone who has been deleted on a computer screen, not intentionally. So even I mentioned this, it was Mohamed Daoud, not Nasiri. Last time I confused the two. But it was Mohamed Daoud who said that, who's this guy? We don't know anything about him. And the famous Moroccan historian, Mohamed bin Zidane, who wrote in the early 20th century, who wrote extensively about Moroccan political history, diplomatic history, has no mention of Mohamed bin Haddū. And that's a specialist in diplomatic history, so let alone, the previous historians. Contemporary historians, Moroccan historians, know about Mohamed bin Haddū, but cannot actually provide any account of him because of this scarcity of resources. But fortunately, because of his trip to London, he met numerous people. He spent 6 months from late December 1681 to July 1682, and during that period, as I will be showing you, he had numerous activities and encounters, and he featured in numerous journals and diaries of English Restoration authors, literary authors. Also in the press, and mostly in the archives, in the official correspondence. There was a lot because of the logistics of bin Haddū. Is a public figure. We have Mohamed bin Haddū, my former professor of mine and former lecturer here. It occurred to me at some point that, is he related to you, perhaps? I should investigate that. No, but there are a few bin Haddūs, by the way. There's not just one bin Haddū. Mm-hmm. I'll be referring to different bin Haddūs, not very friendly amongst themselves. So, and the sad thing is that Mohamed bin Haddū, unlike the Moroccan tradition, didn't leave an account of his mission to England in the 17th century. His contemporaries, like Mohamed bin Abdul Wahhab al-Ghassani, left an account of his mission to Spain, published originally in Arabic, called Rihlat al-Wazir fi Iftikak al-Asir, and it was a mission to redeem the slaves in Moroccan, Muslim slaves in general, in Spain. And a century later, during the reign of Sidi Mohammed bin Abdullah, late 18th century, there were several accounts of diplomats who wrote their accounts, like Ahmed al-Ghazal, نتيجة الاجتهاد في المهادنة والجهاد. And by the way, رحلة Abdul Wahhab al-Ghassani was translated by Nabil Matar. So that is strange, you have to wait for someone else to come and translate your own account. Mm-hmm. That's a very structural problem here in Morocco, that most of the important accounts have to be translated by foreign scholars, European American scholars. Ahmed al-Ghazal's account is also translated recently. It appeared in 2017. It's called The Fruits of the Struggle in Diplomacy and War, Moroccan Ambassador Al-Ghazal and His Diplomatic Retinue in 18th Century. I don't have a copy, it's hardcover and rare, but one of those days I'll get a copy. There's also Al-Asir, Al-Iksir fi Iftikak al-Asir, by Mohamed bin Uthman al-Miknasi. Is quite a famous account, published in 1965, and to my knowledge, it hasn't been translated yet. So at least the accounts, and numerous others to Istanbul and other places that have been translated and published. The only account we have, the only slim account of Mohamed bin Haddū was published in an article by Abdelmalek Essaadi, the former historian, diplomatic historian. Abdelmalek Essaadi, anybody? Okay, that's something that you should probably make up for. Do some search on this 9-volume diplomatic history of Morocco, published by Abdelmalek Essaadi, who was ambassador himself, who was a public figure and who was a historian. And so he had, access to various archives. And he went to England and to the archives, the National Archives, the British Library, and had a lot of support from the Moroccan embassy in England. And so he ended up publishing this article, which unfortunately, in the tradition of some Moroccan history, is very eulogistic. It heaps praise on Mohamed bin Haddū. You end up looking at bin Haddū not as a historical figure, but as a hero. So But the article is available and you can access it. It was published in Majallat Al-Akademia several years ago. On the other hand, we have numerous references to Mohamed bin Haddū in the diaries of John Evelyn, Narcissus Latreau, Elias Ashmole, and Sir John Reserby. All of them have diaries and journals of what happened during the Restoration period. And so during the year 1682, they would actually provide a lot of entries on the ambassador's activities, their encounters, his official meetings, etc. When you collect all of these entries and you put them in chronological order, you have a sense of what he was doing, as I'll be showing you. So one thing before I dig into this, this presentation is I want to share it with PhD students. They often complain about lack of materials, lack of references, and this could be a strength rather than a weakness. It creates this desire for you to look everywhere and to appreciate every piece of information, every source, every document. So, you know, using all these scattered notes and references and trying to read them one against the other, it helped me construct quite a solid account of what happened and what he did. The English press, the London Gazette and London Mercury had also, because of his activities, they covered those meetings in their papers, and so I had the ability to also compare this with the private accounts of those diarists. And recently there's a book that came out recently that's by a British historian, and I don't want to brag, but initially I had this as a project, and it was sent by the publisher for me to review it. And I couldn't believe myself, like, wow, are you kidding me? Of course, this has to be published. And so I praised it, because the historian is a major British historian, military historian. So he's one of the best British historians. And so, eventually, and because I knew the title, I was always looking for, has it come out yet? Has it come out yet? And the first time I heard about it, I ordered the book immediately. So it helped me, actually, that was the missing piece. I know there's still a lot of missing pieces, but this was a major one that helped me finish the article on bin Haddū. Okay, because this is the correspondence, the official correspondence of Percy Kirk, let's say the last governor of Tangier. Someone came after him just to finish things up, but he was the last governor of Tangier from 1681, that's the time of bin Haddū's mission, to 1683. So he covers the period of bin Haddū's mission, and his correspondence and his recommendation, his advice with the secretary, well, the foreign secretary, and also with the Tangier commissioners, members of the government, is abundant and has a lot of tips and information. Okay, so this is a very useful book. Okay, I know, but you probably want to look at it. So let's look at this first slide. What you have here is Mohamed bin Haddū, a painting of Mohamed bin Haddū by Godfrey Kneller, and I'll be referring to, and Jan Eyck. These Dutch names are difficult to pronounce. Mohamed bin Haddū Al-Attar. This is not the only painting we have or the only illustration we have. We'll see some, but this is a famous one. It's in the Chiswick House, and we'll be talking about it in a minute. But I want you to have a look at this painting. It's very famous, and famous because Godfrey Kneller was the major artist in England, the portrait artist, and he painted portrait of Charles II, Queen Catherine, King James and King William, and all the kings that he was a contemporary of, and as well as many famous people like Isaac Newton and John Locke. And so he's paintings all over the place. And for Ibn Haddū to be painted by Godfrey Kneller, that was a big deal. It was common for all these extraordinary visitors to have their paintings. So Ibn Haddū was naturally one of them. And another one that you probably have encountered before, this dates back to 1600. That's Abdelwahid bin Saud bin Mohamed An-Noon, the Moroccan ambassador to Queen Elizabeth, like 82 years before, during the reign of Ahmed al-Mansur. Of course, he was also received with pomp, and he made such an impression on the literary and artistic figures of his own time. And some studies, numerous studies on Elizabethan drama, connect his visit to the sort of momentum or the effusive interest in the Moorish figure during the Elizabethan times. And some even connect this to the works of Shakespeare, Othello, and other plays. But before we can talk about Mohammed bin Haddū proper, I have to give you some accounts on English occupation of Tangier. So how many of you here have a clear idea about English occupation of Tangier? Anybody? Mm-hmm.
Not a very clear one, but a little bit of a...
Okay, well, we have one. Anybody else? Generally, that's normal, okay? A lot of people don't know. Did the English actually occupy Tangier? Yes, they did. And for 22 years, yes?
And they even reached the Zen, I think. I read one of the stories, even the king.
Yeah, well, that's a different story. Travelers went all over the place and lived for, substantial periods in this part or that part. But actually to possess the whole city and control it and defend it for extended period of time, the only case is, the English case is Tangier. They didn't occupy any other city before or after, okay? Whereas, of course, we have a lot of Portuguese and Spanish colonies along.
I think it was given as a gift, like as a dowry.
Yes, that's right, that's right. Okay, so look at a contemporary map of Tangier, and you see the old Tangier, the 17th century Tangier. It's very small compared to Tangier, and today it's not very difficult for people from Tangier to locate the old English Tangier. The outer bounds of Tangier were the Mershan Park, okay? So that's the limits of Tangier. But of course, they planted forts beyond those bounds. Come in. Okay, I'll quickly go through these details so you have an account of how important the mission of Ibn Haddū was. So initially, it was the Portuguese who occupied all of these coastal cities from Ceuta to Santa Cruz, Agadir. And that was part of their broad maritime, exploration that they kept going to southward along the African coast, then to the forest, okay? And so these were outposts where they built garrisons for their ships to station and get, water, food, etc., etc. And also because it was a continuous war between the land of Muslims and the land of from our perspective, the infidels, or the Christians and the infidels. And so, as you could see here, it's clear over there. These are the dates of the periods in which the Portuguese occupied these different presidios, which were recaptured. Many of them were recaptured during the Saadi period and some during the Alawid period, okay? But in 1578, the Battle of the Three Kings, Ma'arakat Wad al-Makhazin, the Portuguese were defeated, and 2 years later, Portugal and all its colonies become part of the Spanish Empire. One thing you should remember is that these different royal, these kingdoms were related to one another. So when the Spanish took over, it was not just a military incident or encounter, but it was a family arrangement. Okay, yeah, family business, like the uncle of the Portuguese king, Sebastian, was the Spanish king, so naturally he would inherit his empire and all of his colonies, including Tangier. Okay, so for a short period of time, well, not very short, but from 1580 to 1643, we're talking about 63 years, Tangier becomes Spanish. Right? From end of 16th century to almost mid-17th century, 1643, it became Spanish, was Spanish because of that political change that happened during the late 16th century. But in 1643, there was an uprising in Portugal, and in Tangier they supported this uprising, and the Portuguese took over Tangier. And so that's, Portugal became independent, but it was a fragile kingdom and needed protection. And of course, you can't seek protection from the Spanish because they are the aggressor. So, the only power that could counter the Spanish were the English. Okay, the English were on the rise during the 17th century, especially with the Restoration period. You know a little bit of British history. I don't have to go through this. The Cromwell period, the Civil War, the Cromwell era, and then the restoration of monarchy. Charles II, who was in exile in France and then Netherlands, was brought back, and so there's a new period of reign, and Charles and his brother James came back. Their father was beheaded, if you remember, Charles I. And so it's a new era in England, and Portugal looked up to this new power for protection. And so, like the business transaction, the inheritance, so you want to create an alliance, joindre l'agréable à l'utile, so, a marriage between the Portuguese princess, Catherine, a Catholic, to a Protestant monarch, Charles II. And because of that, Charles II acquired the city of Bombay and the city of Tangier, and free access to trade with Brazil and Portuguese colonies all over the world, which were regained afterwards. So that's the context in which Tangier became Portuguese. But the Portuguese were already suffering in Tangier because there was a guy who began to emerge. So these are the details I mentioned a little while ago. I keep talking and I forget, moving these slides. So the English came into possession of Tangier at the end of 1661. End of December. There's always something about December. Ben Haddū travels to London in December, and the English took over Tangier in December. And actually, the Portuguese had to ask him for help because the city would not have withheld for a long period of time because of these attacks by Haddū Al-Attar. Is there a Ghailan here? Anybody? Ghailan? This is a famous family name in the north. But Al-Haddū Al-Attar was the rising figure in the north of Morocco. Very quickly, to give you a sense of Moroccan history during this period. So, Ahmed al-Mansur died in 1603, the same year as Elizabeth I. And after him, his descendant, his successors were not as good as him, were not as great monarchs, and they fought together, and they destroyed that empire within 40 years. By early 40s, Morocco was divided among several zawaya. There was zawaya that rose to power and had a political influence over the region they controlled. And the last sultan, the Saadi Sultan, was able to control the region of Marrakesh, the capital, with the region of Asfi, Essaouira, more or less. That's the entire space he could control, politically, militarily, economically. The other regions of Morocco were more or less like principalities. In the Souss region, there were this guy called Boudmia in Moroccan historiography. In the middle region of Tadla to Salé and Fez, there was the Zawiya Dilaiya, famous Zawiya. And in the north, we have Ghailan, who controlled the region from Qasr, L'Araish, and then you come to Asila and even the bounds of Tangier. And then the family Naqsis in Tétouan controlled the city of Tétouan, but then they become allies of Ghailan. And so you could see Morocco split in different parts. But by the late 50s, 1650s, another Zawiya rose to power, and that's from Tafilalt, as you can guess. So the beginning of what became Dawla al-Alawiya. So initially Sidi Mohamed, and then his brother Rashid was the one who did most of the hard work. And so he invaded all of these tribes and fought. This is an extended civil war. That's in the book I mentioned. There's a lot of parallels between English history in the second half of the 17th century and Moroccan history, believe it or not. It's the rise of two monarchies and, consolidation of power, and then Tangier becomes this challenge between these two powers, different as they are, who can prove themselves. Of course, there are a lot of differences that I don't want to get into. But Moulay Rashid was eventually, through military power, through an aggressive policy, he was able to subdue all of his enemies. He destroyed the Zawiya Dilaiya. He defeated Ghailan eventually, and Ghailan had to flee his way to Algiers. And when he died, he came back. And so he was able also to defeat in the Souss region. This guy, I forgot his name. His name is Boudmia something. Forgot his full name. But all of these Zawiyas were brought under the Alawite, the rising Alawite power. And Rashid died, and he was succeeded by his brother Ismail, who was his deputy in the city of Meknes, and that's how he got infatuated with the city of Meknes, and he wanted to make a capital out of the city of Meknes instead of the traditional capitals, Marrakesh and Fez. Right, so that's more or less the scene, but before then, it was until 1666 that Moulay Rashid was able to defeat Ghailan. During the early period from 1661 to 1666, the English had to deal with Ghailan. And Ghailan was a master of the field. As you will see with Mohamed bin Haddū, there's this natural skill of riding horses and fighting in the hills, in the mountains, in the rivers, wherever you like. And so he gave hard time to the English, who, of course, are a very organized army. And so a lot of ambushes and a lot of attacks. And one of the things I say in the book is Ghailan has not received the credit he deserves. The problem with official historians of Morocco from the 18th century onwards, from even the late 17th century onwards, is you always praise the ruler. And you vilify the one who is defeated. But during the period of Moulay Rashid and Ghailan, all these powers were competing for control. And so it was not natural rivalry. But Ghailan in Moroccan historiography is almost absent. And our famous historian, Mohamed Hajji, who wrote a book called Zawiya Dilaiya, talks about Ghailan in terms that show him as a villain. and I criticize that, because Raylan was able to hold the expansion of the English. The English, with instructions from King Charles, had these plans to expand because Tangier in that tiny spot could not survive. It has to create the condition for its survival and thriving, as they did in Northern America. And so there were plans to subdue all of the territories around and create a sort of economy that could consolidate the presence of the English in Morocco. And Victorian historians, late 19th century historians, lament the lack of strong will among the political elite, the Restoration elite, to invest money and expand the colony at all means. And so they lament the fact that North Africa could have been British position and the British control if Charles was serious enough and minded his duties rather than having this luxurious life as he did. Okay, so the first governor was Lord Peterborough, who is no match to Raylan. Okay, these aristocrats, believed that it would be like a fun trip in Tangier, but from the first days. Reminds me sometimes when Moroccan soccer team plays well and shocks, the other very respectable teams. So how could these guys do this? But like in a sense, that was the nature of encounter between English, I would say British in a sense, because there was not just English, there was the English and a lot of Irish and a lot of Scottish soldiers, but always the English gets the credit for all these wars and casualties and fighting, and that's something we lament. So, quickly, there were like 10 governors, and in between there were other governors who served for a short period of time until the official governor is nominated. But there are 10 official nominated governors from England that succeeded to the rule of Tangier. That shows how ineffectual some of them, how hard of a situation the Tangier was. 2 of these were shot in the battlefield. 2 of these governors were killed in the battlefield. One is Lord Teviot, perhaps along with Percy Kirk that I'll be talking about, are the most able commanders. The rest were, public figures or those who sought a good job and a way to enrich themselves and to acquire a certain reputation. But they proved in the short period of time that they reigned to be completely incompetent. So a short period of time, 22 years more or less, because the English left in April, but the demolition of the constructions in Tangier started in late 1683. So some of the incident, on May 3rd, 1662, remember, the English took over officially and English flags were hoisted on Tangier's walls in December 1661. Okay? Now in May, that's like 5 months afterwards, there was this deadly incident. 400 English soldiers were killed in an ambush. Now 400 in a garrison of maximum 4,000, that's like 10% of the population, military skilled soldiers were killed. And on April 63, Lord Peterborough was recalled. It's like he was unfit for the job, and Lord Teviot, Andrew Rutherford, was nominated in his place. Now, Lord Teviot was the governor of a garrison in northern France, Dunkirk. There's a famous movie called Dunkirk for different reason, but he was the governor of Dunkirk, and once the French bought the the city or the colony from the English. The English were able, the English government was able to get the soldiers, but also Lord Rutherford. And Lord Rutherford was sent to Tangier. Like, you are the right man. We need someone who's got experience like you. They sent Rutherford, and Rutherford died on May the 3rd, along with another 400 soldiers by the forces of Ghailan. Okay? Now you could see within 2 years, about 800 plus, a lot of casualties. This was not a place that you could easily expand into. And so they changed their plans and begin to, after the first reactions that Tangier would be the genesis of a big colony and that there wouldn't be a lot of expenditure, they begin to reckon with the reality and recognize that it is going to be hard. But Charles had a special affection for the city because this was a gift brought by his wife, Catherine. Okay? This was not a colony that he could give to a company like the English East India Company, as he did with Bombay in 1668. This was his own city, and he appointed a committee called Tangier Committee in Whitehall, in the seat of his own government, and he nominated his brother James to be the president of this committee, and the committee included only the best of the best politicians to run its affairs. And so it was a very special colony or possession, and like the American colonies in Northern America, which were administered differently. So this is a picture of Ghailan. Of course, this is a fictitious one, as with a lot of Alawid sultans. Sometimes you think that's exactly the picture of this or that sultan. But this, as we'll see, this was how Ghailan was imagined. And in the book, I have references to how he was described in pamphlets in a very idealistic way. He's like a monster. He could pop up any time and could just, like Aisha Qundisha and do all these things. There's an account that I found very funny that talks about his soldiers could move 40 miles without being noticed, and they could rise like, like jinns, like ghosts, and surround any army, etc. So there was all this very exaggerated images of Ghailan. So Ghailan eventually would, under the pressure of another contender, Moulay Rashid, who was even fiercer, so he had to conclude a treaty with the English in 1666. And this treaty enabled him to acquire powder to use against his enemy. He defeated the Dilayit at some point, and he controlled the port of Salé, the biggest port, the Tangier port at the time, Salé. But with Moulay Rashid, who claimed, of course, ascendancy and lineage to the Prophet, and who was able to, mobilize money and power and religious figures. So he was no match. Ghailan was no match to Moulay Rashid. He was defeated, and then he ran to Asila. His house in Asila is still there. And eventually he was removed by the English to Algiers. So that's Ghailan. And this is the picture of, it's the mall of Tangier, but you have the entire colony itself. You could see the housing and the layout of the whole city. And this is in the atlas by this Dutch cartographer. It's in the early 60s. So because of those debacles, because of those incidents, the English had to change their policy. And now instead of expanding inwards into the land, they decided to build a port, a big port. So to receive ships and to enable the city again to survive. Because Tangier was draining the royal purse. Okay, the money allowed by Parliament was, of course, closely monitored, and so he could not spend a lot of money on Tangier. He has to justify all of these expenses, and so seeking different ways to make Tangier survive on its own. So there were these plans, and they appointed a guy called Haddū Al-Attar. So a lot of interesting people around Tangier. Haddū Al-Attar was a young English engineer, and so he was appointed to the job, and he had these plans of constructing a large mall that would enable the city to receive ships and to be a sort of free port for Freeport. Now, Tangier, someone has to do a comparative study between these English plans for Tangier and the modern Moroccan plans for Tangier. And so for some times, these things seem to work. And, you know, as I said in my book, there were significant progress in the building of the mall. As we'll see in some of the maps, this is Wenceslas Holler's. Professor Wiley last year brought some of those pictures and spoke about them. But Wenceslas Holler visited Tangier in 1669 and made a lot of drawings of Tangier during that time at the behest, perhaps, of the English governor. He himself suggested to go to Tangier and provide these visual artifacts, but he later developed them into full engravings, and so we have this visual materials that sees how the progress of the Tangier Mall. So you could see here the length of the construction. It went on until late 70s. On and off, depending on numerous reasons. Conditions, supply of funding, because sometimes, you know, there's no money to send, or workers, or all sorts of reasons. So it was a slow progress. And Wenceslas Holler, Haddū Al-Attar continuously complained about all of these difficulties and constraints that prevented him from finishing his work. Eventually, he was replaced by another engineer, but he didn't have enough time, this engineer, to complete the work, because in 1678 things will take a different turn, a turn to the south. But before that, in 1668, now the end of Ghailan, okay, there's a nightmare that we're done with, and the Alawite Moulay Rashid continued his work until 1672, trying to pacify or fight his rivals, his competitors, the other contenders. So they forgot about Tangier for a while, and Tangier had, a sense of, relaxation from these continuous pressures by the forces of Ghailan. And so they reduced the garrison from 4,000 to 1,400, and some reforms were introduced in Tangier. They turned it from a military outpost into a civil city run by a corporation, like a municipal city with elected members and, all the laws that could encourage traders and merchants to engage rather than the military establishment. So around this time, the Alawite dynasty, and particularly Moulay Ismail, came into power in 1672 after the death of his brother. And Ghailan came back from Algiers. He still had this plan to revenge and to return to his former power. And he rallied his friends and the tribes in Beni Gorfot and all those regions. But, Moulay Ismail was again far superior, and he defeated him, and eventually he was killed. He was caught up with and killed. So the end of Ghailan and the beginning of the Alawite. And from 1673, for 5 years, Moulay Ismail continued the work of his brother to pacify the country. He led expeditions south and west and east, all over the place, to try to control these rebellious tribes. And what we have here is the location of different, because we think of Tangier as the only possession, but there were all of these forts, as you could see on the hills. Their names stated at the bottom of the illustration all over the place. So they expanded beyond the city into, I don't know exactly where, but I could imagine to Boulevard Pasteur and even beyond that, okay? And in every outpost, they would have a dozen or a couple of dozen soldiers controlling the regions and making sure that there's no, surprise attack. At the same time, allowing their horses and cattle to graze in the fields and collecting woods, etc. For a colony to exist, it's not just walls and Tangier is very, very claustrophobic. For the 4,000 individuals that lived there and the numerous others who frequented the city, you need to expand beyond those walls. So during the period of 1673 to 1678, it was, in a sense, a period of peace for the garrison. Now, 1678, things changed because now Moulay Ismail turned to Tangier. Okay, then I was like, hello, we're going to see what happens in this part after finishing his work with his contenders in the south. So in January 1678, he sent troops by Qaid Umar bin Haddū. Now, Umar bin Haddū is not a relation or a relative of Mohamed bin Haddū. If we mention their full name, you'll see that they are different. Umar bin Haddū al-Battiwi, no, Umar bin Haddū al-Himami al-Rifi al-Battiwi. Okay? The other guy is Mohamed bin Haddū Al-Attar al-Asafi, from Asfi. So, completely different. So Umar bin Haddū led the troops of Moulay Ismail, and he named him, he appointed him his viceroy, his representative in the northern region, from Al-Aqsar onwards. Aqsar, the city of Al-Aqsar was more or less the big city of the north, instead of Tétouan or Tangier. Tétouan was like by itself, and Aqsar was bigger than Asila and even Tangier. In April, in 1678, the attacks begin by attacking the outer forts that we saw a while ago. And as will be seen in the other illustration, in April 1679, they renewed the attack in every spring. Best time for attacks, because in the summer you're involved in agriculture, collecting the crops, etc. In winter, it's very cold, but the best time to attack is spring. So in March 1680, they besieged and destroyed Henrietta and Charles Fort. Let me show you this on an illustration made by a former student of mine, Yusuf Dilat, whom I acknowledge in the book. So based on all this illustration, he created this map to make it easy. So they attacked Henrietta Fort, as you could see. By the way, the Devil's Drop, that's when Lord Teviot was killed. Okay, so Henrietta and Charles Fort, and 160 soldiers killed, 53 taken prisoners. Let's see Charles. You could see Charles there, and you could see Henrietta. These are very close to the walls of the city than Kindle or Ann Fort. And, after that, they signed a truce, not a treaty, a truce, for 4 months. And once it ended, attacks were renewed in June. And so another governor who was not competent enough was recalled, and someone sent in his stead. So Inchiquin was recalled and succeeded by Fairborn, who I consider more or less a tragic figure, because he was a soldier from the very beginning, and he rose through the ranks until he became a high official. When Inchiquin was recalled, Fairbairn, his deputy, replaced him, and after that he was officially nominated as governor. Now Fairbairn will be shot in the field like Teviot in 1664. So it was around this time, if we go to England, travel a little bit to England, I should have said this, I'm taking you through a journey, between two countries before we get to Mohamed bin Haddū. In England, starting from the early 70s, political problems started. Charles' brother, James, Duke James, converted to Catholicism, divorced his Protestant wife, the mother of future Queen Mary, converted to Catholicism. Now the Parliament refused to allow him to be the successor. And so a constitutional crisis emerged in England between those who supported Charles and his decision to nominate his brother, and the Parliament who saw in James II a replica of Charles I. Charles I was not a Catholic, but he wanted to reign like a Catholic, an absolute monarch. So they didn't want James II to succeed. And at some point, there was, in 1678, I hope I have the dates clear in my mind, the famous Popish plot. Someone claimed that there was a coup d'etat in the making, and that there were many officials, high-profile members of parliament involved in this planned coup d'etat to assassinate Charles and replace him by James. Eventually, it proved to be a false claim, but it created this environment of dispute, of discord. And it was around this time when Tangier was under attack that Charles appealed to Parliament, which was dominated by Protestants, by Whigs, to support Tangier. And in Tangier, as I've said, there was a lot of Scottish soldiers, but a large number of Irish soldiers, Catholics. And there were all these rumors that Charles is training them in case he wants to use them domestically. So they begin to get reluctant about sending money to Tangier. And there was all these debates that are accessible today because of social media, that you could read the debates of these members of parliament for and against the supply of funds for Tangier. And eventually they came up with a decision that we cannot supply to Tangier. We're willing to do that, but you have to give us guarantees that this is not going to empower the Catholics domestically in England or in Tangier. So that is the kind of crisis that was emerging and will affect Charles' decision eventually. Part of his decision to evacuate Tangier in 1684 has to do with the situation at home. Eventually, James succeeded to the throne, as you know, for 3 years, from 1685 to 1688, but there was the famous Glorious Revolution that he was forced to abdicate. Okay, there's a lot of history that you need to know. But it's relevant to our talk, and I have to do this quickly. So in 1680, he appealed for funds, and he was able to send some 600 soldiers with some funding, and the famous Percy Kirk was sent around this time. Okay, late 1680. And on October 27th of 1680, there was this famous battle between the Moroccans and the troops of Amr bin Haddū. Amr bin Haddū is not there; he was already in Fez, in Meknes. But this was this battle that was, major and caused a lot of casualties on both sides. And Fairbairn had died a few days before that. Fairbairn was supervising the troops, and some Moroccan somewhere sent him sniper, shot him dead, and he, not immediately, but he died a day or two afterwards. So it created a situation where it was decided that we have, rather than these skirmishes, we have to do a wholesale encounter, but it didn't settle anything for either parties. On the part of the Moroccans, it was okay. It's just another day. Like, we have enough troops behind, we could supply more troops, but for the garrison, it was catastrophic. It was a critical moment, and they had to agree to a 6 months truce, another truce. So that is the context where things begin to shift, from expanding into the colony to reconsider whole plans. Now, Kirk, the Percy Kirk, who just arrived with the troops after the death of Fairborn, they decided to go to Meknes, as Sadat did when he went to Jerusalem. It's like the best way to deal with the problem is to go straight. So he went with 60 officials, went to Meknes. It was a risky thing because in 1669 there was an ambassador sent by Charles I to Moulay Rashid, but this guy freaked out, had all these nightmares about being captured and enslaved, and these guys cannot be trusted. So, they gave him a safe conduct, like Alik al-Aman, as we say in Morocco. You can come and you can have business transactions, but he refused, and he sent his deputy, and his deputy kept insisting, like, it's okay, come please. But he delayed for several months and eventually says, no, I can't. So he was recalled. It was a missed opportunity for the English to make a deal with this new dynasty. But Kirk decided to lead a delegation, and he went to Meknes and he met the famous Sultan. And guess what? The Sultan liked him. And in the old traditions, like, you can be my friend. You're a man, you're my match, etc., something like that. I like your politeness, your conduct, and because of that, I decide to grant you a 4-year peace. So go. Now, nothing will happen to you. You have my word. You can stay for 10 years, for the next 4 years, no problem. And so he was even allowed to go to the capital, to the sacred city of Fez, and visit, and there's an account of their visit to Fez around that time. Now, the English sent an ambassador called James Leslie, who was not as polite, as suave as Kirk. And, the Omar bin Haddū and the Sultan decided, like, we don't want to deal with him. You take the 4-year peace, or go, or war. But Kirk had this idea that, could you send an ambassador just to confirm these terms and to treat with the king and his commissioners? So he insisted on that. And the king gratified his need, but it took almost a year after that, because we're talking about end of 1680, early 1681, when Leslie came to Meknes. But it was until the end of the year, 1681, December, that an ambassador was sent to England. And that's why this book is important, because Kirk, after this visit, he kept sending reports on what he accomplished and what the situation was like inside Tangier. That it helped us understand the context of this mission. So eventually, a guy was nominated, and his name is Mohamed bin Haddū. Was he a major, high-profile figure? No. The ideal person would have been Omar bin Haddū, or his brother Ahmed bin Haddū, who ruled Tétouan, the city of Tétouan. Forget about Naxis. Naxis were liquidated afterwards during the early reign of Moulay Ismail. Or even his cousin, Ali bin Abdullah Rifi, the cousin of Omar and Ahmed bin Haddū Rifi, all the same Rifi family. None of them. It was this guy Mohamed bin Haddū. Who was Mohamed bin Haddū? Mohamed bin Haddū came from a line of courtiers. His father served in the Saadi dynasty, and he was sent on errands here and there and served the military purposes, etc. But he was connected to one of the relatives. Mohamed bin Haddū was connected to one of the relatives of the Sultan. So now he was close, but not close enough. So he sent him, perhaps, and that's just a question, he didn't think too much of this trip. He didn't bet on it. Otherwise, he would have sent one of his close servants. So Mohammed bin Haddū goes to London, but he took two of his companions. He was the deputy Muhammad al-Hafid and secretary Haj Muhammad Luqash in the correspondence Lucas, and an English interpreter Jonas Rowland. These are very dramatic figures. All of them. It's like you couldn't have an interesting group as this. Muhammad al-Hafiz was Muqaddam from the tribe of Anjra. Anybody from Lanjra? Come on. Lanjra is a huge tribe in the region between Tangier and Tetouan, so you could be one of them. You never know. Go and trace your history. So he was a major soldier in the army of Umar bin Haddū. Secretary Haj Muhammad Luqash. Years ago, in 2013, I published a collection of short story. You tell me, what's the connection? In it, there is a narrative, actually, Hamid Al-Maghribi, it's one of the stories. And Hamid Al-Maghribi is based on the life of Muhammad Luqash. Okay, now I reveal the secret. Okay, Muhammad Luqash, an interesting figure and still very mysterious, because at some point, he was with Ghailan. He served with Ghailan because he spoke Spanish and he was very conversant with foreigners, etc. And the British historian of the early 20th century, again, my memory is terrible, the English outpost, Enid Ruth had a reference to him, but I don't know if I can depend on it. I still have to investigate it. She says that he was sent to James II, that he went into the garrison at some point in the early 60s as a spy, and he claimed that he wanted to be converted to Christianity, and they sent him to London as a servant of James II. And James sent him to be trained in the Netherlands, but he came back and then he abdicated, and he was who misled the troops at some point, was it in 1664 or some later date, that he actually ran back to Ghailan. And so I used that context for the story. Now, after Ghailan died, he went on pilgrimage because he was fighting in a sense, in the ranks of the enemy of Moulay Rashid. So he decided to go to a pilgrimage, and he came back, and once you're Hajj, no one can touch you, because, you know. So is this a good reason? But somehow later on, he was employed by Umar bin Haddū, and he became part of his close advisors, and he sent him constantly to Tangier for various Iran's negotiations, etc. Now, Luqash was assigned this mission as secretary of bin Haddū. Both of them were, like friends, servants of Ali bin Abdullah, who succeeded Umar bin Haddū. And Ali had so many grudges against Muhammad bin Haddū. He wanted to be the one who controls the affairs with the garrison for various reasons, to maintain this prestige and this position next to the Sultan, and also because you can profit yourself from all sorts of presents and gifts that could be sent, and even correspond with Charles II, as Umar bin Haddū corresponded with the king himself. So for someone who is quite, unknown, to come to this prestigious position was something that it was not very much appreciated by the whole Rifi, Ahmed Ghailan and his cousin Ali bin Abdullah. And so the theory is that they sent these two guys to monitor and control the ambassador. And English interpreter Jonas Rowland was an English soldier who converted to Islam and ran away in the early years of the garrison. He was probably captured, and then he decided to turn as a Muslim, and he become a qaid himself, okay? Once you are Muslim, you know, like al-Islamu yajubbu ma qablahu, and so he was, because of his knowledge of English and his military skills, he was employed by the Sultan. And because of his ability to translate, his communicative skill, he was sent. Now, Kirk, once he realized that Roland was among the group, the retinue of the ambassador, didn't like it, and you know, tried to stop this, and corresponded with officials in London to stop this. But eventually, they decided they wanted this mission so badly that they had to accept Roland to join. Okay, so. You know, this delegation arrives in London and had this audience in Whitehall. Whitehall is the seat of English monarch. I should stop. It's already 12. But I will have to go through this quickly because sometimes I forget myself. So anyway, as a gift, he took a lion and a lioness and some 30 ostriches, very common gifts by the Sultan to foreign powers. And in the map of William Morgan, you could see, you know, it's very, very tiny, but this is a map that we could expand, and you could see the ostriches in St. James Park. This was the map of London in 1682. It's a huge map that shows all the parks and the palaces and the courts. So Mohammed bin Haddū stays for 6 months and concludes land and a marine treaty with the commissioners of Charles. He was generously entertained by the political and social nobility in London. He was admitted an honorary member of the Royal Society. Now, he was so busy during that 6 months that he was considered like a guest of honor. And during the first days, he would go with his own companions to Hyde Park, a huge park in London, and ride horses, you know, Tvorida, or, you know, I don't have to explain it. And they would show, you know, under the watchful eyes of the king and his courtiers, they would watch the Moroccans ran at full speed, holding their spears and sometimes even standing on the horse, doing all those, you know, all those sort of gestures and appreciate his equestrian skills. He was also very polite because during the invitation he received in the palace, you would expect that someone, a Moor, would behave in some sort of barbarous or very awkward way, but no, he was very polite and very suave, and he took to the ladies and not even look at them in disrespectful ways, and would answer only the question and drink and eat in a way that shows that he was well, you know, he was well bred and used to high culture. So Eveling, I mentioned the diarist John Eveling, who attended him, accompanied him, escorted him to all sorts of activities, wrote this, that when he was received at the Duchess of Portsmouth's residence in Whitehall, he conducted himself with modesty and restraint, quote, did not look about or stare on the ladies. So the ambassador and his companion were placed between the ladies. They were not seated separately and served separately, but they were seated around a table, and the ambassador between two ladies, and then the other guys, it's the same thing. And he didn't look about or stare on the ladies or express the least surprise, but with a courtly negligence in pace, countenance, and whole behavior, answering only to such questions as were asked with a great deal of wit and gallantry, and so gravely took leave with this compliment, he says, that God would bless the Duchess of Portsmouth and the Prince, her son. So that's the kind of reaction he received, and he was observed as a sort of curiosity, and the way he was dressed, you know, the fact that he is a Moroccan, etc. All created this sense of awe about him. So they planned a lot of activities for him. So he went to the beer garden. That was a place in London where they have these savage sports of, bears being attacked by dogs and horses attacked by dogs, etc. And you watch them killed and destroyed. Something similar to the Spanish sport that is still practiced. He was also taken to see St. Paul's church, which a huge structure that was burned during the Great Fire, and it was under construction on grandiose form. He went to theater. He watched various plays in the company of this diarist Evelyn and others. And though he might not have understood the dialogue and the conversation, he behaved himself, and when he laughed, he would hide his laughter. That all of that is covered, by the way. I didn't invent this. I mean, it was all in the diaries of those who accompanied him, the way he behaved himself. There were two major companies in London, and by the time he visited the King's Company and the Duke's Company, but in 1682 it became a united company with professional actors and players, and they played various plays, including Elkanah Settle's The Impress of Morocco, and a lot of Shakespeare's plays. But the highlights were his visits to the Royal Society. I have to show you this. So you could see here at Lincoln's Golden Book. This was like an institute and a club for the lawyers of London. It was a huge field with a lot of buildings, and so he was invited by this body, and he signed his name in the Golden Book. I have the link down there, but we don't have time to go to the website directly and see it, but that's what he says. Alhamdulillahi wa kataba khadimu al-maqam al-ali billah Mohamed bin Haddū Al-Susi al-Ba'mrani kan Allahu lahu, something like that. And that's in the Golden Book at Lincoln's Inn. And he also was invited by the president of the Royal Society, who was also an engineer, who was the one who supervised the building of the church, St. Paul Church. So he was admitted a member of the Royal Society. Now, the Royal Society had people like Isaac Newton and others, so and John Evelyn and many others. And so he went there, and he wrote in the charter book, Alhamdulillahi wahdah, وكتب هذا الحرف خديم المقام العالي بالله محمد بن حدو العطار في 26 من إبريل عام 93 ألف. All translated there.
The other word on the left is Allah bihi Amin.
Right.
Amin. It's just
right. Yes. So among the highlights, as I mentioned, the beer garden, St. Paul Church, Lincoln's Inn, Royal Society, and then the big highlights were the visits to the University of Cambridge and Oxford, the biggest universities, the most prestigious universities on earth. And of course, visiting those universities was not accepted by the president and the president of universities and those who ran the universities, whatever. So but the instruction from Charles were clear. You have to allow him to visit and treat him well, and give him a tour of the colleges. So again, for the accounts of his visits, we have detailed depictions and descriptions, because we don't have a lot of time, I don't want to go there. But he made a good impression, and he met with scientists, with the botanists and librarians, etc. And he was given a detailed tour of all the colleges that he came back very impressed. I should probably also talk about how but he never left a record or a letter that, apart from these quick statements of appreciation, what actually impressed him much, like the Rihlat Safar, for example, where he was taken to the press, the printing press, and he could see all these machines and talk about how advanced the French were. So let's talk a little bit about the paintings. So this is the painting, the portrait around the time when he was, the end of his journey. Godfrey Kneller painted his portrait. You have the picture of Godfrey Kneller. And later on, Jan Eyck, finished the landscape. So it was like a collaboration between Kneller and Jan Eyck. So that's a huge picture, by the way. It's like 313 centimeters height and 231 centimeter width. And so it still hangs on Chiswick House wall. If you happen to visit in London, you probably want to go there and see this massive painting. I have a higher resolution. If we have time, I could show you the high resolution. I had to buy a version of it, elaborate version of it to show it. But in the backdrop, what you see the other Moroccans running in probably Newmarket, probably in Hyde Park. He didn't live any place where there are a huge park and train and practice his skill. Of course, Kneller's style is very elaborate. It's the Baroque style. It's always grandiose, magnified, and you idealize the figure using all this royal colors, the red, the contrast, and also this posture of the horse and the rearing shows that in a mode of action rather than stable or static, very richly clad in the Moroccan style. This was not the only one. Robert White also, based on Godfrey Kneller's painting, had this engraving. So based on the painting, he had this engraving. You could see down there the original picture. And so this one I want to use in the article. And I have a license for it, copyright actually, to use it. This was based on Kneller, as I said, and was made available in cheap prints and was sold during that time and afterwards. It is in the British Museum. At around the same time, Professor Diana Wiley, enlightened me about this, that Susanna Penelope-Ross lived in Whitehall and was part of the royal household, and she was very famous as an artist of miniature. So she had this drawing. I read somewhere, but I could not, could not actually see whether that's true or not. That Ben Haddū sat for both Penelope-Ross and Kneller, but we could see that it's not exactly the same. The posture, the look, etc. So he probably sat for Penelope-Ross at another time. It's a different figure here from the one that looks so noble, etc. He looks very modest and very quiet. Over a century afterwards, Tompkins, based on Penelope-Ross, had this engraving of Mohamed bin Haddū. So I would take a few more minutes to conclude the outcome of this mission. Because of his great time and the encounters and the meetings and the conversation he led with the nobility of London in Whitehall and all the aristocrats and the lords, he was invited to their places. He was probably convinced, swayed to conclude the terms of a marriage treaty. And King Sultan Moulay Ismail did not actually give him a commission to negotiate a marriage treaty. So Mohammed bin Haddū believed that the Sultan might accept the terms of the Marine Treaty, like, allowing the English to trade with Moroccan ports, giving them access to Moroccan goods, produce, etc. So he agreed to those terms, and for that he was given some sort of tips, in a sense. He was allowed to buy a gift from the King Charles of 240 barrels of gunpowder. He knew that the Sultan needed war munition very badly, because he was still fighting his own nephew, who competed with him. He was in the Sousse region, and he was still claiming that he was the legitimate successor of Moulay Rashid, and so he had to fight him all the time, and he continued to need the gunpowder. So Ben Haddū thought, like, if I buy substantial amount of gunpowder and muskets, the Sultan would love it, and then probably would not mind the fact that I signed a treaty, or agreed, not signed, agreed to the terms of the Marine Treaty. He even bought, on his credit, he didn't pay, probably I'm answering the question, he didn't pay, he borrowed money from his friends, his new friends, from the merchants, that he would pay back once he gets to Morocco, because he didn't brought those substantial amounts of money. And so he bought 1,000 barrels of powder, which later on Kirk didn't want to allow him to take to Meknes until he pays the merchants from whom he borrowed the money. King Charles even gave order to release 90 Muslim, Moroccan, North African slaves. This was captured in the sea and brought to serve in Tangier in all sorts of domestic labor in the ports, but also they were bought by soldiers, officers, and they worked in the gardens and in different places. And so he ordered all these slaves to be released so that the Sultan accepts the deal and signed the Marine Treaty. There were also English captives, slaves in Meknes that he hoped the Sultan would reciprocate his generous act by releasing. And the Sultan was very furious with him, and we could only guess that it was Qaid Ali bin Abdullah and Ahmed Ghailan, Ahmed bin Haddū were working behind the scene to, undermined all the treaties that he signed, all the work he signed. So, when he returned, the Sultan was very furious with him, and so he was neglected for some times. But in the English archives, in the French archives, many decades after, or several years after, we see that he was pardoned, and he became close to the Sultan. And in a letter to Charles, Ben Haddū himself says, "When we returned from your side, some people envious of us intervened, fearing that we might deprive them of their ports, of their position and territories, and told things about us to our Lord, the Sultan, may God give him victory, which were not true, in order to turn our Lord against us out of envy and hatred for us." So the rise and fall of Ben Haddū. This is the picture of Percy Kirk, who was, in my opinion, the most capable English officer in Tangier. Not quite corrupt, I would say, in a sense that, from Pepys, he didn't like him. Samuel Pepys, the famous author, literary figure, and also administrator, didn't like him from the first encounter. Thought he was vulgar and he was corrupt. But Kirk was actually the one who got the 4-year treaty, and the Sultan stood by his word until the end, when Charles decided, because of the domestic crisis I mentioned earlier, but also because this was not leading anywhere, and the Moroccans were bent on using the garrison till the last moment, using them to provide arms, weapons, and allow them to exist as long as they wish. So they decided to evacuate Tangier, and they sent Samuel Pepys with Lord Dartmouth to supervise the process of evacuation. And so they destroyed the city. This is the letter of Moulay Ismail to Charles II, and you have the Arabic part. in which there was a kind of spot between the king and the sultan. The king sent a reproachful letter. The King James sent a reproachful letter to the sultan saying, why don't you abide by the terms agreed by your own ambassador? And, like he gave us his words and we thought his word is yours in that you officially nominated him, etc. The sultan didn't like it. The letter was sent in Arabic, written by a guy from Cambridge who was like a major Orientalist, but his Arabic was terrible. And when the sultan read the letter, it contained expressions that were not very courteous. Right? Because the letter begins, and I think I may have the beginning of the letter. You would show, the tone of the sultan. Very quickly, I know I have taken more time, but this is a long story, and I'm trying to cut it short. So the beginning of the sultan's letter begins like this: Assalamu ala man ittaba al-huda, amma ba'du, addressing the king. King Charles VI. فقد بلغنا كتابك وفهمنا ما تضمنه. By the way, this is the inscription of the letter that you saw, the original. وفهمنا ما تضمنه خطابك فوقفنا منه على ما ذكرته من العيب وعدم الصواب وقول ما لا يليق وقلة تجويد الخطاب أو ما قيل فإن النار بالزندين تذكو وأن الحرب أولها الكلام إذا لم يطفئها العقلاء. I was just typing, if you sign like, typing mistakes or spelling, whatever, just forget about it. Because this was like a way to transliterate the Arabic, so I could translate it afterwards. إذا لم يطفئها عقلاء قوم أخاف أن يكون لها ضرام. فقد كنت أحسب أن مباشرتك, and he's using you in the singular, مباشرتك بالخبر لنا ومباركتك لعلي مقامنا وتقبيل اليد منكم إلينا إنما هو على طنجة إنما هو على طنجة التي أعطيت لك في صداقك وهي مقر تجارتك وسفنك وفيها معاشك وهي this is not like a good translation. So this is the original of a translation. So I used this draft just to transliterate. So I couldn't find the refined version of Arabic. So just to give you a sense, وهي, I don't know, إنسان عينك لب عينك or something like that. إذ لولاها ما تجول سفنك شرقا ولا غربا ولا تأمن عليها أو تصل بعدا ولا قربا وقلنا إنك لا تحاول إلا على بقائها, etc. So this is the tone of the Sultan's letter. And let me just go back to this part. And then the section relating to Ben Haddū is this: فالسفن التي هي بتلك المراسي إنما هي هنالك بيد بعض الرؤساء الرئيس merchants ليس لنا بالبحر خلطة ولا قط دخلنا له شقة فلا نسأل عن تلك السفن إن سافرت ولا يسوءني أمرها إن حصرت فمحمد بن حدو إن ضربتموه لبطنه. And this is the Arabic version, like if you bribed him or if you ضربته لبطنه, it's an Arabic verse, like you seduced him in a way. إنما ضربتموه لبطنه وقاولكم بشيء من تلقاء نفسه فعلى ذلك كنا عزمنا على جره. Actually, one of the punishment of the Sultan was to, draw the man in two opposite directions by horses, so that his butts, you do that with enemies. وعزمنا على جره وعلى ذلك ما كنا أردنا أن نجره إلا على تلك المسألة التي ما رعى فيها ما نفعه معنا ولا ما أضره فعليها عاقبناه ولأجلها عملنا به ما عملناه. Anyway. So this is the letter. I could share it with you, and you could see the royal seal there. So eventually, as we said, the evacuation. This is a painting that shows the demolition of Tangier. You could see the Moroccan troops supervising from far the destruction of the city, the houses, the port, the ramparts, etc.
This is this is the sea, right?
Yes, the sea. Yeah, you could see the sea there. You could see the Jews River, Wedlihud, right? And you could see the city over there, the inside city, and the troops of Ali bin Abdullah, the successor of Omar bin Haddū, supervising the city and waiting. They didn't know what the English plan to do? Did they plan to give it to someone else? So they were alert and they watched the city as it continued to be destroyed for weeks and months. They evacuated the population, the civilians first, and then the soldiers, and then they continued the destruction. The people who lived in Tangier were compensated for their houses and their property and businesses, and so they were so happy. In one of the pamphlets says, like, we couldn't be happier, you know, going out from this prison, or let's say hospital. They use these phrases, prison and hospital. So Tangier was compared to a prison, a dirty prison, and a hospital at the end. So they were sick of Tangier and they wanted to go back, especially now that they could have a property somewhere, wherever they wanted, in London or elsewhere. So this is how big the port was at some point, the mole. And this is how it ended eventually, with all the destructions happening and the explosions, and the end of the story. Towards the end of his visit, Mohamed bin Haddū there was a poem by a guy called Waller, one of his acquaintances, and very eulogistic poem. Your comely person and ingenious ports has by a magic spell conjured up hearts, so did it appear and shew their faces towards you, when in your pomp and laces the Morocco ambassador, the nation did cry, was a man truly worthy of glory, that where he went wanted no servants at all, because they all came by themselves. People would be with him both low or tall. They thought they could not do too much for him. A man as liberal as a flowing spring, resolving to see this ambassador great. The like they know it has not been of late. Stay, stay, dearest sir, a little longer. If you do, our love too will grow stronger. So anyway, I think you have questions, and I have not exhausted everything. But the last 2 points very quickly. The importance of this mission, that we don't have a lot of material to use to counter the English archives and materials, but we could read through those materials. Both the occupation of Tangier, the continuous extended English presence in Tangier, and particularly this mission, changed English opinions about Moroccans in radical ways. We could see those in the performances in the plays at the time, that the Moor is not associated with all those vilifying terms as we have in Elizabethan terms. Also a little bit blurred image, but it has become even clearer. Not only Tangier, but the entire region of North Africa became so close that writings, cartography, maps of the regions became much more accurate, more nuanced representations of Moors. And perhaps this was a stage, I think, in the evolution of the British Empire, that they begin to recognize that other cultures might be different, but they're not as easily controllable, or areas that you could easily dominate and control. And this was like a wisening episode in the history of empire.
I would like to ask, can we call this occupation a failed attempt by the English in the 70s? And if so, if it's a failed attempt, how can we relate it to the latter in the 20s, limited involvement of Britain and of the occupation of Morocco and handling it to France and Spain?
Thank you.
Of course, we're talking about two nations, or about a world that is evolving at different speeds. So whereas the Muslim world, so-called the Muslim world, stretching from Morocco to Persia, in the years or in the centuries from 15th, 16th century onwards, didn't do very well in terms of economy, social dynamics, etc. We could see all this part as Orientalism later on shows us all these travelers that went into the Orient, describes all these aspects of life that are still simple, backward, lack of industry, lack of everything. Like we have two paces, the modern world from the Renaissance onwards, the Europeans advanced and progressed and, built ports and cities and expanded beyond European territory and creating these colonies. And as a historian says, there's a lot of centrifugation of capital into Europe, a lot of capital that comes from the colonies, empowering Europe itself to become more modern, more industrialized, more democratic, finding ways, sometimes through wars, as in Napoleonic wars, etc., to change the political, economic, cultural structure of these countries. In our part of the world, things didn't go in the same direction. So naturally, that impacted the kind of exchange that existed. In the period of Moulay Ismail, of course, Morocco didn't have the same industry as the Europeans, or trade, or network of trade. And so depended on the fact that we controlled the land and that we're self-sufficient, in a sense. But as we move into the modern centuries, you could see the Europeans far advanced, and they could even, impact the domestic order in North Africa or in the Arab world, right? One of the examples is the ability of the European traveler to infiltrate into these places, because by the 19th century, late 18th century, you have consuls, and you have merchants, and you have companies that could guarantee the status of the European traveler, who could travel at ease and will be protected and will have the means actually to hire local servants to employ. So there was a tilting imbalance that became slow from the 16th century. It became more prominent by the end of the 19th century. So naturally, the British were able to impact domestic politics in such a way unimagined in the period of Moulay Ismail. The tone of the letter of Moulay Ismail compared to the letters of Hassan I to Queen Victoria, completely different, okay? And the tone of the British minister, the British consul in Tangier, as opposed to those consuls that came to even a century earlier to the reign of Sidi Mohamed bin Abdullah. You could see even the language, the discourse itself, there's a huge difference. So that naturally lead to the dominant role of the British and the French and the Spanish and the Germans in the affairs of North Africans and in many other parts of the African world, right? So, but we're talking about an early period in which these territories were monitored in a way that guaranteed a certain self-sufficiency and certain autonomy. Still at the same time, there were some sort of conflict and clash, cultural, military, etc. The British, that's a clear and obvious information, were very much involved in Moroccan politics in the 19th century. And actually, they were the ones that maintained a certain balance and certain order. And were it not to the British influence in Morocco, Morocco would have been a French colony much, much, much earlier. Okay, the fact that the French were able to occupy Morocco in the early 20th century was because of the British acceptance and consent. This could have happened as early as 1844 when the Battle of Islay. They could have easily invaded Morocco and planted themselves, at least in part of Morocco, and from there expand until afterwards. And would have been much easier for them than much later in the early 20th century, where perhaps because of the excess of arms, etc., and because of the political climate, they found it very difficult.
Well, thank you, Professor, for such an informative presentation. Well, I truly benefited a lot from it. I mean, I didn't know like so many things about these relations between Morocco and Britain, generally speaking. So my question is about Ghailan's soldiers. was there an account of the number of the soldiers on the part of Ghailan compared to the 400 British soldiers? And my second question is about whether there are any cinematic productions on the topic. Yeah, thank you.
We don't know. How could we know? But they were in the thousands, okay? They were in the thousands, and he could replace them easily. We're talking about massive tribes from Anjra, because he was able to, make a deal with Naqsis family, so he had control to the resources of Tetouan, and to the tribe of Anjra, the tribes from Tangier to Al-Qasr. All these tribes could easily be mobilized because it was a noble cause. We want to expel the infidel from our land. This is a religious mission. And then you could make money. You could profit from the spoils of the war. These English are so wealthy and so rich, and we could, take their weapons. Arms were very valued items. If you can get a rifle or a gun or whatever, these were like huge profits. No, there was no film about Ghailan. I would have known. Unless there's something that is somewhere I couldn't find.
My question is a bit of a personal one. It's not really about the subject itself, but about the process. I would like to ask, and to enlighten the future, maybe scholars who are willing to pursue history as their major, or future historians in general, I would like to ask about how do you tackle a topic such as this, since you said that you didn't find many content about it at first. So what's the process, and how do you find the results that you are looking for? Thank you very much.
It's a passion, and sometimes historians and archives is like police, detectives, You're very smart, you know how to, sometimes you come across a note, and then you connect the dots, and a whole thing becomes clear to you, and you couldn't hold yourself with, the pleasure that, wow. And it's only you who knows this thing, by accident perhaps, or by hard labor, you come through something, and then you feel, how can you do that? You have to suffer, and you have to have the passion, and you have to travel. I'll tell you this, I wouldn't have written this book were it not to some of the grants that I received. They came by chance. I couldn't spend, I could, but I had other things also worthwhile spending money on. But it was because of the grants that I could stay for extended period of time, spend hours and hours, reading archives and trying to struggle with all the handwriting, etc., and even take pictures and bring those. So, sometimes there are certain things that happen without your planning, and the access to archives, to the libraries, is the first thing that puts you on the right track. If you come across archives, archival materials, somehow you have a mission already in you that you have to do something with these materials. But if you don't care. In the case of Ben Haddū, it was a long journey, and it's still not completed. I still need to continue to dig. What happened exactly? You could take these simple facts that I mentioned, this incident, and explore them further and further, and discover numerous other things.
When you talked about Ghailan and the way his personality and him as an individual, his image, was manipulated by some historians to be antagonized in some narratives. This also reminds me of Al-Mnabhi, who some historians call him an innovative person and a great educator and a wise man, and others call him a very vague person, or a very what do we call it? Conspicuous person. Okay. Where does this attitude come from when it comes to dealing with individuals like this, where you have one individual but two different narratives about the same person?
Oh, there are lots of figures that were not actually respected enough for their work, for their contribution. You know, Nabi is one, Rasul is another. And Ghailan definitely is someone that needs to be, you know, rehabilitated in the Moroccan history. I mean, I still hold firm to this, that Morocco would have been different, or the history of Morocco would have been different were it not to Ghailan. He stood fast during those 5 years and fought when the English came with so much power, with so much vigor, that they wanted to expand.
I read somewhere that Ben Haddū's mother was British. I don't know if you came across something like this. So his mother was not Moroccan, at least. So is it true? And that's why he was, in the eyes of the British, such, you know, a refined, you know, figure who didn't look much different, you know, from them and from the British high society in general.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, there are two narratives. Kirk said that his mother was English, but he himself stated that his mother was French at some point. So, but I will take that with a pinch of salt, as they say. It was common. There are two things. You know, wealthy people, Moroccan wealthy people, would have like wives from the Balkans, you know, as a gift. You know, they marry more than wife naturally, and so, you know, because of the captives, etc., they could, you know, easily procure a wife, a blonde or from another country, to their Berber woman, to their Arab woman, Arabiya, Shilha, etc. They could also have a Christian woman converted. So it's possible. But at the same time, the ambassador always claimed that they are from this country, that their mother from this country, so that they create a certain bond. But it was only, you know, a trick sometimes, I think, to, because it's not the first time that I hear an ambassador has, you know, the first ambassador was sent to Elizabeth was also claimed to have a mother that was not Arab Muslim. So it's typical for ambassadors to claim their ascendancy or lineage from a Christian country. At the same time, it's possible because these wealthy people could get wives from other countries. Okay? Anything that I haven't answered? Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your